It is July 5th, 2019, and you're watching Battleground. Well, folks, as you can see, Ezra Levant is not here. He is on very important business in the UK, namely the Tommy trial. And yes, we're going to get right to the heart of that matter. I'm David Menzies. My co-host is the she-devil in Wild Rose Country. That would be Sheila Gunn Reid. And Sheila, I guess let's just cut to the chase, as they say in Hollywood. What do you make of this? 3 charges Tommy Robinson has been found guilty on. We were talking off air earlier. You were pessimistic. I was optimistic that he was going to walk away from this. The reason why I was optimistic was Ezra's brilliant reporting from the UK, setting out, not any kind of emotion, but the facts of the matter. And I thought he did such a superb job in making the case for why Tommy is not guilty, that he should be walking, that he's already been punished severely for things that he did not do. But here are the guilty counts, Sheila. Number 1, breaching reporting restriction. Number 2, live streaming video outside the court. And number 3, aggressively confronting and filming defendants. Let's start deconstructing this one by one, starting with number 1, Sheila, breaching reporting restrictions. Sheila, he simply did not do this.
No, he didn't. And he was very cognizant. You can see in his video that he's not on the steps of the courthouse. He's far away. This is, I think you made the point that Ezra laid out the facts very carefully. And when you look at the facts, of course, Tommy's not guilty. The problem is the legal system in the UK doesn't seem all that concerned about the facts, and they never have from the very beginning, based on the fact that Tommy was basically convicted once and imprisoned, falsely imprisoned for a very long time when no facts were heard. So, now that the facts are out there, it doesn't change the fact that the legal system really doesn't seem to care what those facts are. Moving on to the point of aggressively confronting the defendants in this rape trial, do you know what the aggressive confronting was? Tommy said, "How do you feel about the verdict?" A normal journalistic question outside of the courthouse, not inside the courthouse. He asked them, "How do you feel about the verdict?" Which is a question any BBC reporter would ask. This is really just crazy.
But Sheila,
and you know what? I'll just make another point before I go on. This is a question that the BBC will ask Tommy Robinson, and yet they will not be held in contempt of anything.
Well, but this is the thing. I think it's a moot point. Well, maybe I'm ignorant of British law, and if there's some British viewers that can educate me to the contrary, I welcome that. But even if he was aggressively confronting the defendants, and remember, these are rapists, some of them child rapists.
Yeah.
But that, as far as I can tell, is not illegal. When you say aggressively confronting, there's almost an innuendo that there's some physicality involved. But we're talking about questions, and as you adroitly pointed out, Sheila, he wasn't aggressively asking questions. He was very calmly. Yeah, and this is Tommy at the time. This is him being aggressive and confrontational. I know, Sheila, it doesn't look aggressive and confrontational to me.
No, and let's be real here. The UK is where tabloid journalism was born. They invented aggressive journalism. This is tame, what we're seeing here from Tommy. And, one of the contentions was that Tommy's questions would jeopardize the outcome of a trial. Well, if Tommy's asking about the verdict, The trial is wrapped up, and I think it was wrapped up the day before. So how does asking them about a verdict jeopardize a trial that's already said and done? I mean, this is really, it's crazy.
And Sheila, this is not opinions being expressed by us. I want to point out an excellent tweet by our good friend Andrew Lawton, who was also over in the UK covering this. And he noted that the UK Judicial College's Guide to Reporting Restrictions says the following about courts, quote, "Courts have no power to prevent publication of material that is already in the public domain," end quote. So nothing he said was a part of a publication ban to begin with. I mean, it had been widely reported. So if he's citing sources, namely other newspapers in England, why aren't those papers and editors and publishers and reporters also on trial? But no, it's just Tommy.
Right. And like as Ezra points out on his Twitter account, if you really want to see what happened inside that courthouse and inside that courtroom today, and you want some expert analysis through a lawyer's mind, a trained lawyer's mind, go to Ezra's Twitter feed. He points out that it is the normal standard for the mainstream media to do exactly what Tommy Robinson did. And he points out that it's exactly the same way that journalists harass Tommy all the time when he's going into court. And Tommy's lawyer isn't even criticizing the media for doing that. He's just showing that it's the normal course of conduct for journalists in the UK. And his lawyer even showed a video to the court of how Tommy gets confronted in the very same way. And the journalist who did it was sitting in the courtroom with Tommy today. And yet still, that's okay for that journalist, but it's wrong for Tommy. You see, there are different sets of rules in the UK. There's one for citizen journalists just trying to do their job because the mainstream media won't. And then there's another one that protects rape gangs from accountability. And nothing is ever going to change in the UK as long as people who are trying to tell the truth are persecuted for it, because this goes beyond prosecution. This is persecution.
I agree, Sheila. And the underlying message is, I think the authorities realize that they have a demographic, cultural time bomb on their hands. And rather than clamp down on that, rather than have honest journalism state what the case is, they are almost literally shooting the messenger. Not shooting the messenger, but incarcerating the messenger if those ugly truths should see the light of day. And I mean, let's go to point number two, conviction number two, rather, the guilty verdict, Sheila. Live streaming video outside the court. Again, maybe I am ignorant of UK law, but certainly in North America, this is not illegal, Sheila. I would assume it's not illegal in the UK. So what is this?
Well, I guarantee you right now, outside of the Old Bailey, there are satellite trucks streaming live feeds, giving their expert analysis of what happened inside the courtroom today for Tommy Robinson. What Tommy did was no different. He just used Twitter and Periscope, which is a cheaper and more effective way to do journalism in the modern era than what the mainstream media are doing in the UK. This is really just protecting the monopoly that the mainstream media in the UK has on the dissemination of information. And honestly, it endangers citizen journalists going forward, because basically it says you can't do the very same job that the mainstream media is doing in a different and better way, because there's a separate set of rules that apply to you.
And by the way, Sheila, as you were talking, just to let our viewers know, this is Tommy, I guess, in a media scrum outside the court after the verdict. But, you know, you're onto something about how the UK looks upon journalists. I mean, Ezra mentioned this the last time he was in England, where basically, you know, the journalists in the court were asked to display their I don't know what the term is. I don't know if it's press credentials or government approval certificates or what have you. And like obedient trained seals at Marineland, all the journalists held up their little slips of authorization papers, something Ezra didn't have, because as he explained to them, journalists in North America don't need this, right? But it was kind of funny to see this, the way the authorities were acting, but even really weird to see that journalists who should be muckrakers, who should be the ones that are rocking the boat, that, should be the ones that are striving to get the truth out there, they were so compliant. They were like little, school children going, look, teacher, I have my papers. I'm allowed to be here. It's staggering. I just can't believe this is a nation that, against daunting odds, to say the least, went through 2 Second World Wars without being conquered by the enemies. Now this is something that, I don't want to get overly dramatic, but it's Orwellian. It is like something out of 1984. And what's so disturbing is that, yes, there are protesters, and they're very flamboyant and emotional outside the courtroom and angry about what's happened. But it looks like, for the most part, British society is kind of like, well, what are you going to do? This is disturbing to me, Sheila.
Yeah, there's this strange compulsion for mainstream media journalists to think that they belong to some sort of elite club, when journalism isn't a license that you get. It's not a title, journalist. It's something that you do. It's an action. You commit journalism. It's not, it's an action. It's not a title of, something that you assign yourself, and you don't need permission from anybody to do it. In fact, good journalism is done, it speaks truth to power. It doesn't abide power. We've got some super chats here, though. We've got one from my friend Justin with Proud Boys Calgary. He gives us $6.99 Canadian. He says, one rule for Tommy, another for the mainstream media. 1984. He may be killed in prison now. Justin, I fear that you could be right. I hope that you're wrong, for the sake of Tommy, for the sake of freedom, for the sake of his very young family, for the sake of the West. But, I think Tommy also shares this sort of pessimistic outlook on his future. I hope you're wrong, but you could be right.
Yeah, I hope he's wrong too. And Sheila, the judge also mentioned that a further hearing for appropriate penalties will take place on July 11th. Appropriate penalties? This man already spent several days in jail, in solitary confinement, which, by the way, is illegal under the British law of how they're supposed to treat convicts, and lost several pounds of weight because he was rightly afraid that his food was going to be contaminated by people in the jail that hate him. I would argue that even if you agree right now with these 3 guilty verdicts of what the judge rendered, and I certainly do not, but let's play devil's advocate and say through some kind of bizarre technicality, the judge got him dead to rights. Well, my penalty, Sheila, then would be time served, because that was an outrageous sentence, and the fact that this is being retried is outrageous too. I'm just wondering, what do you think's going to happen? I think they have it in for him. I'd be shocked if they said, well, you've already served your time, move on. I don't know, again, I don't know the nuances of UK law when it comes to this, but what do you think, Sheila, Tommy might receive as a penalty come July 11th?
I think we've just learned through this outcome of this trial and the one before that we should drop all pretenses of thinking that the justice system in the UK is going to do the right thing. I would not be surprised to see if he is sentenced to confinement, and even for a ridiculous amount of time. I'm hopeful that they just, decide time served. You've been through enough. This has cost you enough. But I'm I'm not convinced that that will be the case. We have some more super chats though.
Okay.
Someone named Biggest Complainer gives $4.99 and says, Sheila, you are a 10. Okay, bye. You know what? My camera is slightly out of focus, which is great because I'm approaching 40 and I would like to go through life slightly out of focus now. But thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you for your super chat. David Anderson.
Yeah, by the way, thank you, Biggest Complainer. That's not an alias for Lady Menzoid, is it? Or no, let's move on.
That woman's a saint. Okay, David Anderson gives $5 Canadian, says, time for Tommy Robinson to seek asylum in Canada or the USA. I think Canada's out of the question there. Britain no longer exists except as a historical artifact. Isn't it horrifying that this is the country where the idea of, entrenched human rights are from? Like the Magna Carta.
The Magna Carta.
This is how far it has fallen.
And by the way, I do agree with you. If he is going to be a flight risk, don't come to Canada. Go further south to the United States. Because Sheila, and I know Ezra has stated this, and I fear he might be right too. We're maybe 5 to 10 years away from the UK in terms of the draconian approach they take to free speech now. And we see it right now, every day, to those people who should be paying attention in this country. We've seen motion M103, basically anti-blasphemy legislation. Don't say nasty things about Islam. We see at the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights bringing back Section 13, the pro-censorship, anti-free speech provision that the Harper government eradicated, rightly so, in 2013. And by the way, Sheila, don't see a whole lot of opposition by Andrew Scheer and the Conservatives on either of these files. Who are our champions when we see our rights and freedoms slowly being chipped away like this? Well,
not just silence from the Conservatives, they play along. Look, Michael Cooper got M103'd, and when he quoted from the Christchurch shooters manifesto to defend Conservatives against a malicious libel that somehow we were the cause of these Islamophobic attacks on mosques, he cited the shooter's own words to say, yeah, he wasn't a conservative. He resented conservatives. Conservatives were perfectly fine with not only striking this accurate defense of conservatives on the whole from the record, just memory holing it, Orwellian style, but then they removed Michael Cooper from the committee for simply defending normal conservatives like me. So yeah.
Sheila, that was unprecedented. I was in that room, that committee room, to witness firsthand the actual striking of Michael Cooper's words from the record. I've never seen this in my life. I was having deja vu. I thought it was back in the 80s, that season of Dallas that never happened, where Bobby Ewing died and he appears in the shower. And yeah, everything that happened in season 4 or 5 or whatever it was never happened, folks. Move on. This was surreal. And like you said, where has there been any public pronouncements anywhere by Andrew Scheer or any other conservatives about this? Yeah, it's like they're compliant. And to bring it back to the Tommy trial thing, it's when you have a Section 13, it's when you have an M103, that the state now has a basis to charge you and try you and lock you up if found guilty for having an opinion that might be, culturally insensitive? This is appalling, Sheila.
We have more super chats. And, going back to, thank you everybody for your super chats. I'll get to them in a second. Going back again to Tommy seeking asylum in Canada, we have to remember Justin Trudeau made sure that the persecuted are not at the top of the refugee list. So when Christians and Yazidis facing genocide have to wait behind economic refugees. Don't think for a second that Tommy Robinson's going to get any welcome mat rolled out to him to come to Canada. We've got one from MVP, Super Chat, $7, says, Tommy and his family should flee that totalitarian state. Where do they go to, though? Do they go to the United States? Tommy has a criminal record. That's going to be difficult for him. Anywhere else in Western Europe is in pretty much the same boat as the UK. Maybe Eastern Europe, but they're pretty tight about taking in refugees and asylum seekers of any kind. I mean, does Tommy leave the country, or does he stay and make a stand for freedom? I guess it's up to him and his family what's worth the cost.
Well, you know, Sheila, you raise a very interesting point, and I think you're right. I think Tommy is not a coward. Tommy is not one to run away. Tommy is deeply concerned about what's happening to his country. He's like a knight. He's standing up for truth and values and virtue. And, you know, it'd be nice to see if there were some more allies coming his way. But we see with the media party over there, they've been disciplined. And and now Tommy's being disciplined by the court. He's being made an example of. You know, it's funny, Sheila. I mean, like, you know, the mainstream media, it is what I would call a sunset industry in this day and age of the internet. Revenue is down, viewership is down, subscriptions are down, advertising is down. And really, if you have a job in mainstream media, do you really want to rock the boat? Do you really want to be the guy that gets on the bad side of government, especially a government in the UK, which we now see is vindictive to those that have differing opinions? Or are you going to just say, you know what, I think I'll just write a lifestyle piece. It's time for strawberries and cream at Wimbledon, and I'll get my paycheck every 2 weeks, and I'm all right, mate. How about you? I think that's where we're moving to. I think, you know, the day and age where we see real journalism about stories that are politically incorrect is further and further coming to a close. And Tommy is one of the last man out there swinging, and it's a disgrace what's happened right now. You know, Sheila, at the last Rebel Live event, there was a kind viewer came up to me. He gave me a beautiful blue baseball cap and said, "Free Tommy." I was wearing it when he was originally incarcerated. I put it into the attic with mothballs, thinking, okay, that's done. Now I got to unfortunately get that cap out again. But you know, I'm flabbergasted. I'm at a loss for words, which is terrible for anyone in the broadcasting business. I don't know where we go from here. And I think the next step is just to see, A, what the sentencing is, and B, I don't know this, and I think if Ezra was here, he would probably weigh in. I'm wondering if there is an appeal process, although I'm so jaded now, Sheila, that I think even if it were to be appealed and the appeal was to be heard, I think this is, as Tommy would say, it's a stitch up, or as they would say in Las Vegas, the fix is in, that this decision is rendered in bedrock and nothing's going to change.
We have some more super chats. We've got one from B Atlas, $5 Canadian, says, had a chance to thank David and Jessica. Now, thank you, Sheila. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Every little bit that you give us in the form of a super chat here helps us keep the lights on and helps us do the important journalism that we do here every day. Like, for example, when we send Ezra and Jessica and a team of real reporters to the UK to do the job and give the analysis that the mainstream media just refuses to do, either because they are on side with the censors or because they are too scared to end up Tommy Robinson into contempt of court for telling the truth.
And Sheila, don't forget the fact that, you know, the media has been infiltrated with leftists, and they buy into the politically correct narrative that, you know, I mean, you don't have to sell them on this. They are the sellers, okay? This fits in with their narrative. What Tommy is saying, which is the truth, does not.
Right. I mean, why? I think a large part of this is that Tommy is breaking what he was doing that day outside the courthouse was breaking through this cabal of information control that the mainstream media has. Yep. They only give you the information they want you to have with a neatly wrapped narrative. And so that's the condition of the UK if you get it through the mainstream media. What Tommy was doing was, journalism like what we do here at The Rebel, telling the other side of the story, asking those questions the mainstream media refuses to do. And so if there are more Tommy Robinsons out there and Tommy Robinson is allowed to do that work, then it renders the UK journalists useless. And so they can't have that. So they're more than happy to see a guy like Tommy Robinson locked up.
And Sheila, I have to tell you too, to me, this case, as always, boils down to two things. One, as far as I can tell, he did not breach a publication ban. A publication ban, by the way, that somebody in the Leeds court admitted was brutally botched in terms of the communication of the terms of that publication ban. And regardless whether or not he breached a publication ban, nothing he reported in any way prejudiced the case. That is the ostensible reason for a publication ban. You don't want any kind of outside information contaminating what is going to be heard in court. So on those 2 points, he didn't breach the publication ban, and nothing he said adversely altered the trial. So what is he guilty of? Again, I ask.
Again, how can he jeopardize the outcome of a trial if the trial was already wrapped up? The verdict had been handed down. Somebody explain that to me. Okay, we've got so many super chats rolling in. Proud Boys Calgary, you're feeling a little frisky, I can tell. You give us $2.79 and you say Tommy supporters storm the courthouse. I think that is a terrible idea, but I understand the compulsion to do it.
And Sheila, sorry to interrupt, but just a note to Mr. Producer on that fact. We had sort of a little semi-storming of the courthouse. You can read some more super chats kindly if you could, but maybe Mr. Producer can find that footage to show the anger of many of the Tommy supporters upon hearing these verdicts. But go ahead, Sheila.
Sure, I'll get to the next one. Primpal08, always a generous supporter in the super chats here on Battleground. He says, Scheer hides and his supporters refuse to put pressure on him to actually be an opposition leader. There's a good chance that they'll blow the election. You know what? I always say it, never underestimate the ability for conservatives to drop the ball when basically they've already won the game. And, as a conservative and as a lifelong conservative voter, please, I implore you, put pressure on your conservative leaders to be conservatives and speak up for conservative values. It doesn't do the country any good to just put your head down because your team, because you want to defend your team. That doesn't make the country any better, any freer. Well,
this just shows you what happens when you write policy via focus groups. And as you can see right now, I'm not sure you can see in your monitor, Sheila, this was earlier on. These are the Tommy supporters. Now, they've already breached, as you can see, you see, they're coming over now, more of them. They're holding their signs. They're not even supposed to be in that, I guess, what would be called a neutral zone. And now they're screaming shame at the police officers. And you can read some of the signs. I love that one, no to Sharia law. Whoever's holding that sign, you can bet your booty that you're going to be probably written up on hate crime charges for even saying that. And I think there's about over 85 Sharia law courts in the UK. There's your diversity. Now look at, here come the billy clubs. Got the billy clubs out. These are just passionate Tommy supporters. It would be wonderful if the UK police forces were so ready for action when it comes to rape gangs in certain cities there. But no, they've got the weapons out for people voicing their displeasure at a verdict. My God, what's happened to that country, Sheila?
You know what? Where the heck were their security fences when that Muslim attack mob came after Jessica and Tommy's supporters. There were no security fences there. There were no billy clubs brandished then. There was just some cops with their hands up trying to keep a mob of bottle-throwing lunatics back. Why aren't they taking the same sort of precautions and preparations to protect Tommy's supporters? Or not just Tommy's supporters, normal everyday UKers who just want to have a little bit of safety in their streets and worry about the future of their girls.
Yeah.
Okay. We've got even more super chats. What have we got here? We've got one from Old Dad, sends twice actually, $2 and says, this is why they took away your guns. When there's, I've got so many opinions on that sort of stuff. When you see what Antifa is doing, and the threats that they level at journalists, you wonder why I oppose gun control legislation. When I'm a small woman and I get death threats daily. I've got lots of opinions on gun control. Yeah,
and by the way, speaking of Antifa, and it just shows you again I'll call it the UK creep factor coming into North America. We saw what happened in Portland last weekend with Mr. No being brutally beaten. Needed hospitalization. Our good friend Cian Bexty, he went down to Portland to do some streeters on this. It was very, the silver lining was that the regular people in Portland were appalled by what happened. They don't approve of this Antifa, but you have a mayor there, Mayor Wheeler, who basically, or allegedly I should say, told the police to stand down. And the police chief, Danielle, if you can believe it, Outlaw is her surname, did so. And they allowed these thugs to not only vandalize this time, but to physically assault people unimpeded. Sheila, what this does is embolden them to go one step further. I mean, there's always been bad people since the dawn of time. I get that. I just don't expect the people in charge and law enforcement to aid and abet the bad people. And that's what we saw happening in Portland. And it is a disgrace. And to bring this back to the Tommy case, when you have police threatening people not to make complaints, not to talk about Muslim rape gangs savaging the neighborhood, this is indirectly aiding and abetting the gangs.
Well, yeah, and with regard to Portland, sorry?
Oh, sorry, Sheila. If Mr. Producer says if you could read a few more super chats, and we do indeed have Mr. Andrew Lawton on the line, and we'll get to him after you finish the super chats.
Okay, I'll breeze through these super chats. My point that I was going to make wasn't very salient anyways. Blaine Sandberg gives us $25 with no message. Thank you, Blaine.
Thank you.
Funky Spice, $6.99. Canadian says, I work in film and everyone's a liberal. I want to work with conservative media. Canada's a mess. Only God can help us. Well, God and bold politicians and people pushing for change, maybe. Mark Britton, £10. This was never about the law. It is a political persecution of a man who reveals how the British establishment are corrupt. Tommy will be appealing, but why? Sadly, 90% of the country are celebrating. You know what? I hope Tommy appeals. What else can you do but fight on? Do you just give up on liberty? Do you just give up on freedom? For me, the answer is always no. Now, I can't make a decision for somebody else's family, but what else can you do but appeal? Robert Tuss, $5. The only hope for Western culture is President Trump. Trump 2020. You know what? He is the... I wasn't sold on President Trump before he was elected. I was not a never-Trumper, but I was skeptical. But he is governing from the most conservative positions in probably my lifetime. Basil, and then we've got some Cyrillic characters. I'm sorry. I hope I have your name right. Canadian $5. Don't forget to vote for Scheer this October, people. We don't have a choice. The hair has to go. Don't throw away the only chance we have. Holy moly, super chats, people. Copa Daseo, no? What is an NOK? I don't know. Anyways, it's some currency I don't know, and it's $55. When is Tommy scheduled for execution, and when will the civil war start? I don't know if he's scheduled for execution per se, but if he goes back to jail, that might be the de facto result of what happens to him.
Yeah.
Basil again, $5. PPC has zero chance to win this year and will split the vote and give Trudeau a majority. Is that what you want? I'm working very hard to make sure that Trudeau doesn't win again, but I don't have a problem with people voting their conscience.
Okay. Sheila.
And I think that's the end of them.
I appreciate that, Sheila. I'm going to have to regrettably say goodbye to you right now because we have... Don't take it personally. And by the way, I want to thank everybody that contributed those super chats because we do indeed have Andrew Lawton on the line who... Actually, he will be in 1 minute, so we have 1 minute for... Give us your final thoughts on what we just... Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Producer says you don't have to give your final thoughts because this is not goodbye forever. It's just goodbye for a temporary basis, and you're going to come back as soon as I finish chatting with Andrew Lawton, Sheila, okay?
Okay, that's fine, as long as I get to come back.
Okay. Go powder your nose or something. Okay, then. And folks, we're just waiting to make the connection right now with Andrew Lawton. Andrew Lawton's been doing fantastic work. Live tweeting what's been happening in the UK courts. Geez, I wonder if that's going to get Andrew Lawton on the wrong on the wrong foot of some of the authorities there. And I think we have the man of the hour right now, Andrew Lawton. Great that you could take some time to join us. Should I call you Mr. Lawton, or is it Lord Lawton, or is that some other guy?
No, I think my Lord Justice title has been taken away from my tweeting about Tommy Robinson's trial. So I'm back to the lowly Canadian Mr. Lawton now. Good to be with you, David.
Great to see you again, my friend. Andrew, we're stunned. We've gone through, Sheila and I, the 3 guilty verdicts, the breaching reporting restrictions, live streaming video outside the court, aggressively confronting and filming defendants. Andrew, what's your take? Because as far as I'm concerned, for charge number 1, breaching reporting restrictions, he did not do this. And charges number 2 and 3, live streaming video outside the court and aggressively confronting and filming defendants. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this isn't illegal, is it?
Well, here's where things get very interesting. And I must admit, I don't pretend to be an expert in English law. My interest in this case has really been about a lot of the peripheral factors that have become central to it. So freedom of speech, freedom of press, the way the government is, looking at this story. But the interesting thing is that there was a lot of ambiguity in all of the things that were supposed to be hard and fast laws. And we saw this brought up during the case, one of which was the Section 4 reporting restriction order, or what we in Canada would call a publication ban, that said there was a restriction on reporting, quote, these proceedings, and this was the word. So it's very difficult to make the case that Tommy Robinson was covering these proceedings when he wasn't in the courtroom for these proceedings. He was outside. So that one was very interesting for that reason alone. One of the other ones as well is that there was actually a document that is published by the UK judiciary, the Judicial College. And this document says that there is no restriction on reporting any information in the public domain. And what the Attorney General said is, well, that document was wrong. That document doesn't apply. That has the law wrong. Well, maybe it does have the law wrong, but this is a government from the judiciary that was published to guide people on how to report on cases with reporting restrictions. So even if it is wrong, Tommy would have a defense to say, look, I went through this process. I did my checks and balances. I did my due diligence. But this is where we landed on this. So the case was very much at the beginning about Tommy Robinson did this and he shouldn't have. And then the Attorney General for the UK's barrister walked it back a bit and said, well, he should have known. And we saw between yesterday and today, those goalposts shift ever so slightly, and that may have contributed to the decision, but we don't know that because the reasons for the decision have not yet been published. They'll be made available from the court next week.
But Andrew, I mean, that allegation that the law is wrong, I mean, I had quoted your tweet where you pointed out chapter and verse, not an opinion, but the actual written stipulation of that law, which says courts, quote, have no power to prevent publication of material that is already in public domain, end quote. I mean, what's going on here? You said moving the goalposts. Is this what's happening? They're making up amendments to existing law as they go along here?
Well, and what's more than that is that and Tommy Robinson's lawyer pointed this out, the government didn't actually go after the BBC or the Huddersfield Examiner, which were the outlets that had the information Tommy was quoting.
Yes.
So they were in violation, it sounds like, of this restriction by virtue of having posted the old stories, but the government didn't go after them. So there was a very uneven enforcement of this that became apparent throughout the case.
So why the double standard? That is a perfectly valid question. If Tommy Robinson has been charged and found guilty of these charges, Andrew, then why aren't the reporters, editors, publishers of these other publications also on trial?
Well, I mean, this case is rife with double standards. One of the examples we saw of this was the hordes and hordes of reporters, cameras, videographers that were surrounding Tommy on his way into the court, on his way out of the court. And I posted a little bit of a cheeky tweet. I don't know if you can put it up live, but it's a video of this mass of reporters and cameras following him 30 minutes after he was convicted for filming defendants outside a courtroom. And I know the difference in the case is that there was a reporting restriction on the one that he covered. There wasn't on this one. But then you have to go to the question of why is the system is skewing itself against people that are trying to speak truth. And there's a little bit of a hint to this. And it came from the lawyer for the Attorney General's commentary towards Tommy. He kept referring to this word that Tommy used, or this term Tommy used in that live stream of wanting a people's media. And they viewed that as an incitement to vigilantism, to call on people to be citizen journalists. And that shows there's very much an elite versus everyman battle that's at foot here.
Oh, and Andrew, if you could slightly move your camera so we get your full beautiful face in the frame. No, but Andrew, on this issue of I guess you could call it the state-approved journalists versus the citizen journalists. Look, journalists don't have some governing body. We're not like lawyers that we're answerable to the Law Society of Upper Canada. We're not like doctors. Anybody, let's face it, can be a journalist. Having said that, even if you're just using a blog, on the internet that has an audience of 17 people, you are still beholden to such things that have always been enshrined in our law, such as libel, slander, defamation. To me, that's what counts here. Tommy is guilty of none of that. Absolutely none of that. And the charges that he is guilty of, I mean, again, number 3, aggressively confronting and filming defendants. Well, he was just calmly standing outside the court asking these thugs, these rapists, how they like their sentence. And yet we just ran the clip that you alluded to where he was completely scrummed by the media. I mean, if that's not the definition of aggressive, where they surround him in a semicircle, mobbing him for a comment, then how come, again, the double standard here? Why are there no charges here? I mean, this is preposterous.
That idea you indicated, though, about anyone can be a journalist is not entirely true in this country. And this is one of the things I've learned, as has your colleague over at The Rebel, Jessica, whose name, I no offense to Jessica, I won't even try to pronounce. She tried to tell me on one of the recesses, and I gave up. Jessica S., I believe. But yes. What was interesting is that in the UK, there are actually organizations that will issue what are called NUS cards. And these are essentially licenses issued by labor unions and other industry groups to be a journalist. And while it's not required to practice journalism, anyone can get a blog, anyone can do videos. What these cards are used for a lot of the time is an excuse to keep people that don't have them out of covering official things. For example, to cover the proceedings at the Old Bailey right behind me, the expectation was that I'd have one of those cards, which is impossible to get as a non-Brit. and as someone who doesn't work for a mainstream media organization here in many cases. So we had to go through the ringer, and I was given this little temporary one that served for these purposes. But even then, I was stopped by police earlier because I wanted to go through a zone that was reserved for press, and they didn't know that I was a reporter. So you do have a level of division between what we would call citizen journalism and what the state will allow to cover the state.
Wow, and which begs the question, of course, who watches the watchers? That's an English translation of a Latin phrase. But that is, yes, indeed, Andrew, the NUS card, I was speaking earlier with Sheila about this. Ezra gave that anecdote the last time he was in the UK when he went into the court, and the journalists there for the previous Tommy trial, they were all asked to display their NUS cards, and basically, as I said to Sheila, like a bunch of trained SEALs at Marineland, they all held up their little NUS cards. Ezra, of course, like you, didn't have one, and had to explain, that's not how a free press works in North America.
This is my little NUS card. I'll show you.
Temporary, though, right?
I'm going to get it framed. This is like more powerful than a passport now in the UK. You need it to... So literally, I needed it to walk down the street. So, but yeah, and interestingly enough, and just for context here, and Sheila, I believe you might be joining me for this. Next week, I'm going to be covering the Global Conference on Media Freedom, which is just a few miles from here. And what's fascinating is that on July 11th, it will be the second day of this conference. July 11th is also the day that Tommy Robinson is going to be sentenced for reporting. So how ironic that the government of the United Kingdom, along with the government of Canada, are going to be putting this show onto the world saying we're great at enforcing media freedom. And when I was applying for my credentials for that, they said, scan your license that proves you're a journalist. And I'm like, well, I don't have one. So I just scanned a picture of my passport again. And I said, here we go. I'm a Canadian citizen. That's my license to practice freedom.
Well, Andrew, you are correct. That, I would say, is perverse irony to the power of infinity, the fact that such a conference would be even held in this nation that you're in right now, given this miscarriage of justice that we just saw. Andrew, we have to wrap it here, my friend. We have a video from Ezra, and I want to thank you so much for your excellent work there. Your tweets, I don't know how you type so fast. They're must-read material. If you're not following Andrew Lawton, folks, please do, and you'll get the truth. Andrew, once again, I know you're not the Lord Lawton, but I'd make you Lord if I were over there. And thank you so much for your time once again, my friend.
Thanks to you both.
You got it. And folks, if you can just hang on, we are just queuing up the video that Ezra has just produced. No one better to weigh in on the Tommy trial verdict than the man who has intensely covered it, and of course, a man who also has been a lawyer. And I think we have it right now, so check it out.
For the Rebel.media, I'm Ezra Levant. I'm at Heathrow Airport about to fly home to Toronto. I don't have a proper camera with me. Forgive me, I'm recording this on my cell phone. But just my thoughts on the shocking news today that Tommy Robinson was convicted a second time for contempt of court for the same incident for which he was convicted last time, namely doing journalism on his Facebook live stream from outside a court in Leeds where a Muslim rape gang was on trial. I thought it was... I actually thought Tommy Robinson would have won today. I thought that the prosecution's case was laughably weak. I thought that it was undone by the fact that, well, the trial we know concluded successfully. The men were convicted. So how could he have disrupted that trial? And secondly, what the prosecution piled up into a heap to make up for that lack of real argument, I thought, was that Tommy asked the accused rapists as they walked into court on their judgment day, quote, "How do you feel about your verdict?" That's all he said. No swearing, no blocking or touching them, no insulting them, no assuming their guilt. And for simply saying, "How do you feel about your verdict today?" the judge found that was one of the three grounds upon which he was convicted. And it was just incredible I don't want to call it a stitch-up because I want to acknowledge that I may not have a full understanding of freedom of speech. I thought I understood freedom of speech in the United Kingdom. It was very interesting to me that the last part of Tommy's own lawyer's presentation to the court was videotape of how Tommy is greeted when he comes into the court. In fact, it was ironic. The BBC political reporter was sitting 2 seats over from me in the courtroom, and the video shown to the judges was of her haranguing Tommy and physically blocking him, just to show that that is normal, robust journalism in courts. And that's permitted, but Tommy saying, "How do you feel about your verdict today?" Well, that's apparently enough to send a man to prison. We don't know for sure if he's going to be sent back to prison. It looks like there will be a sentencing hearing as soon as next week. I hope to attend that hearing. In fact, I think I will. I'm just shocked by this, and I think it goes to my own naivete, and maybe even I don't understand how far things have gone. I haven't had a chance to talk with Tommy. He's obviously conferring with his lawyers and his family. If we can do things to help, we certainly will. I think journalism is one of the ways we can help because, of course, he has no voice to fight back. He's being cut off by social media, Facebook, Twitter, and the like. Well, it's a disappointing end to what I thought was going to be a successful week. I'm wrong about how the trial would go, but I think, unfortunately, I'm right about how the state of the United Kingdom is going. And that is going towards authoritarianism. I do not think it is accurate to call the United Kingdom a free country anymore. I think we have to call it partly free, and I find that deeply sad. For the Rebel.media, I'm Ezra Levant.
Wow, well said. You know, Sheila. Oh, Sheila?
Yes.
Okay, welcome back, my friend. You know, again, the way we began Battleground, what Ezra just said there is what made me share Ezra's optimism that today was going to be a good news story, namely that the prosecution's case, in Ezra's words, was laughably weak. Not just weak, but laughably weak. Ezra has, he won't go all the way and call it a stitch-up, but I will. In fact, I'll go one step further. I think the next time anyone walks into that courtroom, instead of walking, they should hop, because it's obviously a kangaroo court in my eyes. This is a disgrace, and I think also, unfortunately, Ezra is definitely right that the idea of calling the UK a free country, it's not true. It's free with numerous governors and restrictions on that freedom, including, I should mention, for all those citizen journalists or just, you know, Joe Blow in the UK having an opinion on social media. Don't forget there's something like 1,000 UK police officers on their computers searching and searching for any word that might be Islamophobic, or maybe you're going to misgender somebody. And yeah, you will get a knock at the door, typically at 3 in the morning, to be hauled out in front of the carpet. This is a disgrace.
Yeah, this is a country that has police dedicated to taking away your gardening tools and steak knives. So,
Yeah.
so I mean, the country really has fallen. We've got a couple of super chats, 3 actually, I think, that came in while you were on the horn with Andrew there. We've got one from Shadow Beretta, $6.99 Canadian. I don't see a super chat question or comment. Richard Vett, $20 Canadian. Thank you very much. Very generous. Again, I don't see a super chat. But if there is one, I'm sure Mr. Producer will send it to me. And one from Alex Lucas, $20 Canadian. Again, no question, query, or comment, just a very generous donation. You know, Andrew did point out there that the sentencing for Tommy is next week, right in the middle of our Media Freedom Conference that's co-hosted by the UK and the Canadian government. No one is more shocked than me that I'm allowed to go to this conference, to be honest with you. It was quite a production to even have us allowed to go. No one would answer our emails. No one would respond to our phone calls. But you know, I guess the government decided that, yeah, we can do this their way, we can do this our way, and our way is probably more embarrassing for everybody involved because we'll make a big stink about not being allowed in. So I think it's pretty timely that while just up the street, everybody's patting themselves on the back, the Canadians for the $600 million media bailout and the UK for their defense of freedom, while they lock up journalists, that the sentencing for Tommy's just up the road.
Oh boy, talk about a news peg from heaven for you in terms of the timing, Sheila. And by the way, let's be frank, this was torture for them, absolute torture in terms of granting you press credentials. But for a change, they got smart. Instead of slamming the door in your face, they realized that unless we turn her back on some trumped up charge at the airport, she's going to come into the country and she's going to cover this as a citizen. So we better play nice and let her in. And I mean, I'm astonished. But you know what? I'm so, cynical now, Sheila. I wouldn't be surprised if what happened to me in Ottawa when I went to cover the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights about bringing the pro-censorship, anti-free speech stipulation Section 13 in, that we got in touch with the Parliamentary Press Gallery a full 24 hours before our trip to Ottawa, and 20 minutes before the committee was to hear, to go on and hear from the witnesses such as Mark Stein and John Robson. That's when the press credentials for me and my cameraman, Efren, were denied. That is slime. These are other journalists playing a game, and they're protected, if you can imagine, by parliamentary privilege. So not only did they say no, but they purposely timed it so that we would do all this expenditure in terms of traveling to Ottawa, getting a hotel, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, we still walked in as members of the public. So really, it was all for naught. And we got to interview the witnesses outside the committee hearing anyways. And by the way, I should notice, the very first thing they voted on, because it was supposed to be televised, was, we're not going to televise it. We don't want Canadians to see this dirty laundry being aired in public. I mean, my God, Sheila, Section 13 hasn't even been reinstated, and these SOBs on this committee are already in full censorship mode.
Well, and when they decided to go dark on the committee broadcast, there wasn't a peep from the Parliamentary Press Gallery about it. Nope. Andrew Lawton, he was able to attend. But I mean, really, the Parliamentary Press Gallery in Canada is just, our version of the NUS card. They get to decide who is part of their little group, and they get to keep a monopoly on information, and they get to keep their competition, which is us, showing up. They get to stop us from showing up and eating their lunch and doing real journalism. They have parliamentary privilege that protects them from us doing a better job than them. It's really quite revolting, actually. It's a neat little racket that they have there. We've got a couple more super chats. We've got one from Selena Ross, $1. Thank you. No super chat, though. Primpal08, $5 Canadian, says, this isn't the UK, this is globalism. Well, it's certainly not the UK that everybody thinks of when they think about the Magna Carta now, is it?
No, it's new UK, and much like a particular soft drink of the 80s, I want my UK classic.
Always with the 80s references. Now we've got UK classic.
I love the 80s. Let me tell you, if you can find me a DeLorean, another thing that came out of the 80s with a flux capacitor on it, I'm setting the coordinates back to the 1980s because I think that was the last decade of sanity before political correctness got not only entrenched on campus, but in law enforcement, in the judicial process, in the media, et cetera, et cetera. I love the 80s. I long for the 80s, Sheila. So many great things happened to me in the 80s, none of which I'll get into here. But anyways, but it was a better time. I will take the freedom that we experienced in the 80s over the crap that we're being served up right now any day of the week, my friend.
isn't that funny that normally you would expect society to get freer over time?
Yes.
That, the idea of God-given human rights would become more and more accepted. Instead, it seems like we reached the top of a bell curve and we're coming back down the other side. My only hope is that we go back up again, and I think that's the case. This younger generation seems to really hate the idea of people telling them what to think, how to say things, when to say them, and how to be. So here's to Generation Z setting the record straight and taking back society, because it seems as though my generation and the boomers, we really let this thing go to hell.
Yeah, no, you're quite right, Sheila. It seems there is hope on the horizon with Generation Z in terms of not following in the footsteps of the millennials, thank God. Sheila, we are almost at the end of the finish line here. I want to thank you, of course, for your contribution today. As well, I want to thank Andrew Lawton for calling in, and of course, our Commander-in-Chief, Ezra Levant, for doing that little video at the airport that in 3 minutes summed up what I, again, refer to as this miscarriage of justice. We'll see what happens on July 11th, and we will also see later this month what you go through at this censorship free speech conference. I can hardly wait. I know you're going to ask all the right questions. And I want to say to all our viewers, thank you for tuning in, and a special thank you out there to all those that contributed a super chat. Every dollar counts in terms of, as Sheila Gunn Reid would say, keeping the lights on. For now, thank you once again. Have a great weekend, and Ezra will be back in this chair next Friday. Take care.